which GoldenGate offers, which is replication of transactional data, so keeping the information about the transactions in mind, and doing this even in heterogeneous environments, not necessary to have the same version of database, the same environment like operating system hardware, etc. So this is something new and different. And if we move further, okay, let's compare these different technologies. If we look at storage-based and host-based replications, they have two major disadvantages. First, they don't know anything about the data that they are copying. They simply copy blocks on the disk. And that means they could end up with copying half of the blocks that were necessary for the last transaction. Then we have a disruption in our network, or we have a power outage of the target server, or anything like that, any major failure there. So not everything has been copied, and we end up in an inconsistent state there on the target, because there was no direct connection between the blocks that have been copied and the transactions. So we can have some data of our last transaction and some not, which is not very desirable on the target, to have data that is not giving us the complete information or showing us the real status of our data. The other problem is, of course, when I don't know what this data means. So this block level replication will copy the bytes, whatever they are, and if you have a corrupted block, they will exactly write the same corrupted block to the target than that was on the source. So we end up with having the failure on both sides. GoldenGate has a completely different approach. I'm sorry. So what does GoldenGate? It captures changes on the database. A database like Oracle keeps the changes in a so-called transaction log, and it maintains this for recovery purposes mainly. So usually it's just written and not read unless you have a case of failure, where you have to go back to your last backup and then roll forward all the information stored in the transaction log. But this is just a file stored on the somewhere on the disk system, and this allows GoldenGate now to read this file. So it needs only read access. It opens the file, reads the transactions, and it understands the content of this file, so it can identify the transactions in there and then capture these changes as they happen through the day. Will capture them. You are able to filter them already on this stage, so you can capture all the data if you want to have a complete standby, or you can just capture a subset of data if you want to synchronize different locations with each other. So these transactions are captured, then routed through the network, which can be anything, your local network or even the internet. And on the way through the network, this data can be transformed, either because it has to be transformed, for example, to transform different data types from between source and target, or because you want to transform it, because you are using a different structure on the target than on the source. But usually in a availability and a high availability scenario, we keep the data as it is, and we have a one-to-one replication, usually from source to target. So then on the target end, the same transactions are picked from GoldenGate and then delivered to the target database. So they are executed from the target database in the same order and within the same transactional boundaries. So you will end up with getting the same changes on the target system than you have on the source system. And GoldenGate does all this in real time or near real time, talking about a few seconds or even sub-seconds of latency between source and target. And it can do this even in heterogeneous environments. Some of the key differentiators are GoldenGate can perform all this capture, routing, and delivery through the network, even with massive volumes of change data, still in near real time, so with sub-second latency. It is very easy to set up. It is very easy to maintain, to administer, to extend, and it's very flexible in use. The different components, capture and delivery, they can be used in any topology you like, and it's very reliable. So this software is in use for more than 15 years and is mainly used by the financial services market, for example, in the payment processing industry, where we have lots and lots of credit card transactions or electronic payment transactions. So the major credit card companies or electronic payment companies like PayPal, etc., they are using GoldenGate, and this, you can imagine, these are really important transactions. So this has to be working well, and all the companies rely on GoldenGate, and it runs perfectly there for many, many years. So this is the basic description of what the product GoldenGate does, and this can be used for different areas. And we will focus today on the first solutions showed on the top of this diagram for data protection, for zero downtime migration and upgrades. But I just want you to know that the same product, the same technology can be used for other purposes as well. So, for example, for operational reporting, or for feeding data from various sources in real time into a data warehouse or into a central data store, an operational data store. Or it can be used for query offloading, which means you don't have to run all your queries which just read data on your processing system, but you can run those queries on a separate system. And the quality of your queries is definitely the same, because the data is kept in sync in real time. So you get the same results asking the separate box, then retrieving the data from the original processing system. There's no difference there if we can synchronize the data in real time. And it can also be used, of course, for data distribution across the network or around the globe. So if you have several locations in your business and use data centers distributed throughout the world, then you could synchronize those locations in real time at every second. So no more dependency on any batch jobs or overnight or something like that, and everybody has insight into the same data.
Carsten, we've had a question from the floor here, and it's a question that might be relevant. The question is, does GoldenGate just work with Oracle, or does it work for other platforms as well?
No, GoldenGate supports many major databases like DB2, SQL Server, Sybase, and some specialties like the non-stop world, or the HP non-stop format tandem world, or Teradata and other data warehouses. So yes, it supports many more databases.
And specific question, Infomix and MS SQL Server.
SQL Server, yes. Infomix, unfortunately, not. We had no demand, I must say, for several years for Infomix.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I explained how the technology in general works. Now we want to see a use case of that, how to use GoldenGate for a zero downtime migration. And in this example, we migrate from Oracle 10 to Oracle 11, but that could also be Oracle 9 or even 8. And you can migrate in one way to a newer version. In addition, this could also mean that we change the hardware or we change the operating system. So, for example, moving from Windows to Linux